What is good, everyone? Welcome into the Views from the 573 podcast. Hopefully, you guys are having a good start to your day and a good start to your week so far on this Tuesday. On this edition of the show, we are talking about the SEC, the conference where it just means more. And we're talking about a conference with two new additions, making it 16 teams in total. So it's going to be a jam packed episode like last week's with the Big Ten. And sounded a little bit long-winded last week, so we're gonna try not to make it as long-winded on this edition with 16 teams. So, yeah, 16 teams. Texas, Oklahoma, welcome to the conference. We're going to talk a little bit about them and the way we've been usually talking about these teams so far in our college football previews is that we've been going through a kind of tier list. We'll touch on some of the teams that are a little bit lower, but we'll spend a lot more times on teams that are up top of the tier list. And boy, there's a lot of them with this conference. There's one, in my opinion, true title contender, and then there's a lot of others that are 2 through 7, 2 through 8, and which makes this a really compelling kind of conference. So that's going to be how the show is going to go down on this edition of college football previews. Later this week, we're going to be talking about the AFC South, so you don't want to miss that as we talk about three sophomore quarterbacks. What did they need to do to improve? I'm sure for Stroud, there's not a whole lot, but there's probably a couple things that we'll discuss a little bit later on this week. So that'll be fun. If you haven't yet, check out our other previews that we've done on our podcast feeds, where you guys get your podcasts. Leave us a rating and review. Definitely does help us out. Check us out on YouTube at 573 Podcast. I think I'm going to upload this full episode to our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out the video version of the pod, by all means, go and check that out and go subscribe and share with your friends, like, comment, all that good YouTube stuff, and find us on Twitter at 573 Pods. Now, also later in this podcast, of course, Rebecca joined us on our AFC West preview and talking about the Chiefs. We also talked about Mizzou for a few moments. So instead of me just sitting here talking about Mizzou, we're going to have a little bit of a clip here for the podcast, for video of me and her spending a few minutes talking about Mizzou and talking about where they fit in this new SEC. So that's going to be put in a little bit later on. So let's talk about this conference, shall we? And there's a lot of notes that I took about this conference and doing some research. Of course, Texas and Oklahoma are finally here. It's been a couple years, and in 2024, they are officially added to the conference, and they are welcomed additions in this new landscape because it seems like Texas is kind of back. You know, they made it to the CFP semifinals last year. So you had them kind of sort of getting back, and you got a team that is really exciting to talk about. And then you got Oklahoma, who did pretty well last year. They got a lot of upside, and especially with some young players. They got a young quarterback that a lot of Oklahoma fans are excited about watching take on the reins full time this year. So a lot of exciting times here with Texas and Oklahoma coming into the conference. And so I think one thing to think about here with this is how are they going to play within this conference and how is that going to affect them going forward coming into the SEC? Because, I mean, they've played SEC competition before in years past. Texas and Alabama had the home and home the last couple years, and they went down to Tuscaloosa last year and beat them. So while they have gone and faced those opponents, they're going to be doing it on a full-time basis now. So how are they going to get acclimated to these matchups and going to all these different places that they haven't been to before? And it's not the Big 12. And while the Big 12, there's some good teams here, you know, there's some middle teams here that we can talk about that can maybe get you if you don't watch out. So how are they going to play being full-time members of this conference? And how are they going to affect the dynamic of it? And just kind of looking at it, Texas and Oklahoma, I mean, just kind of giving a glimpse at my tier list, they're really in the group that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Texas is right up there with teams that are contending in this conference with what they bring back. So they are right up there. And also, just taking a look at this conference as a whole, you add these two to the conference and you take a look at conference scheduling and we can bemoan the whole 8-game conference schedule, and I think it seems like they're going to move to 9 in due time. So you take a look at this conference, and you also read about the tiebreakers that they would have going on because this is now a conference with no divisions, and they would join the rest of college football in doing so. I forget there may be a conference that still does divisions, but SEC, they're not doing that. And so now it's a free for all with who can make the conference championship. So who's going to make it? And you have all these tiebreakers, and you also have teams, and looking at their schedules, not a lot of the top teams face each other. It's only a handful, like, picking out Mizzou directly. Alabama's the only team in that upper tier list that they're going to play this year. And so you take a look at that, they're not going to have to face anybody besides Alabama that's up in that upper tier level of this conference. And so you take a look at that, a lot of these teams are going to play each other. And that could determine a lot of tiebreaker stuff. And I don't know how the tiebreaker stuff is going to go because as all tiebreakers go, it seems like they're going to be a little bit convoluted. So it seems like this conference is going to be really compelling as to in that 2 to 7, 8 range, because now you got 16 teams and you add 2 blue bloods. One of them is going to be in that lower tier, I think, as far as like 8 and 4, 7 and 5, in which, they're not used to that. And I don't think it's going to be Texas. I think Oklahoma's probably more likely in that regard. But in taking a look at it, I mean, a lot of these teams are going to have records that are going to be like, okay, we feel like we can do a little bit better. But just because now you're in a power conference with 16 teams, it's going to be a little bit more difficult now. But a lot of these teams, again, are not going to play some of the higher echelon teams of this conference. And so that's going to take a really big hit on them and what they want to do. So, again, looking at this conference, you got that in play. You also have the biggest question of all, and we'll talk about it when we get to Bama, is the post Saban era because that happened this offseason with Nick Saban retiring, Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama, probably the best option that they could go out and get as far as replacing Saban. And it's going to be there's no replacing Saban. You're replacing one of the greatest coaches. You're replacing the greatest coach of all time. I'm glad I'm caught myself there. You're replacing the greatest coach of all time. It's going to be immensely difficult to be able to do that. And so, how will Alabama look now in the post Saban era? And I imagine there's going to be some teams that are going to be feeling like, okay, sure, DeBoer's a winner, but Alabama is not going to be coached by Nick Saban over there, and that's not going to be a Nick Saban defense. We don't think, even though there's a lot of players that have had experience there, it's not going to be the same. So I wonder how other teams are looking at that. Another thing to take a look at with this conference, and this will be the last couple things before we get on out of here. Actually, a couple more things, but you take a look at schedules in this conference, and boy, are they tough. I think Mizzou's is actually the lowest rated schedule out of all the teams in the conference. And Florida's is on the opposite end, is up at the top. It's the toughest schedule in the country, and we'll dive into that a little bit when we get to Florida. But a lot of these teams are playing super tough schedules, and I think we've talked about the SEC before, and I know a lot of people have too about their scheduling and how they have these cupcakes before a rivalry game and stuff like that. And now you're seeing them, they're playing big time opponents. Like you take a look at the first couple weeks, LSU's playing USC, A&M is playing Notre Dame. You also got Clemson playing Georgia, Tennessee, NC State in week 2. Texas and Michigan are playing in week 2. So it's like props to them for scheduling these tough schedules to not have any doubt by year's end of where they stand when it comes to playoff conversations because you can guarantee that's going to come up in war rooms when talking about these teams and how many teams could get in because now you got this 12-team playoff. How many can get in? Can 3 get in maybe? Could tiebreakers play a part in that? And so you take a look at these schedules and they're really exceptionally tough. And Georgia's is tough. We talked about Georgia's schedule last year and how it really seemed to lack any toughness. It it's changed this year. They got a lot of tough games on the schedule. They got to play Texas this year. So a lot of teams are playing tough schedules this year, and so we'll have to see how the standings shake up. Now, a couple other things before we go out here and get to the tier list. We got new coaches. We already mentioned DeBoer at Bama. We also got Jeff Lebby, who's now at Mississippi State, who fired Zach Arnett after one season. And Lebby has had experience in this conference, has coached under Lane Kiffin, so he knows this conference pretty well. And then you have Mike Elko going to Texas A&M, where A&M essentially is paying Jimbo not to coach there. So you have Elko coming in there, three new coaches, and then you can also say Sark and Venables are new coaches, but we know they've had some years under their belts as far as being head coaches. So you had that. You also have an interesting group of quarterbacks, not really any particular big time stars, although Carson Beck might be the foremost one. But you have guys that are proven after what they did last year with Beck. You have Jalen Milrow. You have Quinn Ewers, who's now coming in, and he's going to be a guy to be looked at, see if he can improve on the stuff he needs to. You also have Jackson Dart. You have Brady Cook. So you have the five quarterbacks there. And you take a look at those five, those are in that upper echelon group that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And there's a couple like that are, you take a look at them, it's like, okay, there's some upside here, and we'll have to see how that goes. And I think you can take a look at Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Nico at Tennessee, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. I think you can kind of take a look at those guys and like, okay, they have a lot of big time potential. Let's see how that can go down the road. So we'll have to see what happens with them, but there's a lot of potential there. So it feels like you got a group of guys that have proven themselves more, and then you got a group of guys that could find themselves up at the top of quarterbacks in this conference later on in the season. And it just depends on how they do with their teams and how they do with their schedules. So we're definitely going to have to see with that. So with that being said, let's go on over and let's talk about this tier list. And for those that are listening or watching to the pod on YouTube, we're gonna have a little bit of a graphic here. I might post a little bit later to our Twitter feed, but this is the graphic that we have and the tier list, and kind of broke it up into five different categories. One being the lower tier, rough stuff. It's gonna be a rough year for you. Number on the second to bottom on the next to bottom tier list, we have 7 and 5 to 5 and 7. And there's a team in here that I'm going to talk about that might be on the line of this tier and the next tier. And the next tier is the spice must flow, meaning there are going to be some spicy teams this year. And yes, for those that if you're wondering if that sounds familiar, it's from Dune. So I figured, hey, I got an opportunity here. I'm going to use it. So that's going to be our third tier. The fourth tier that we have is Georgia's SEC title opponents. And this is where we're going to have a few of our teams that we're going to discuss. We're also going to discuss a couple in that third tier. And then, of course, we have our title contender tier, with it being Georgia. And I feel like there's no other team. You can maybe throw Texas in there, but we're going to talk about them a little bit later on. Let's just kind of go through some of the lower teams here real quick. In the rough stuff category, let's start with Vandy. It's probably the easiest one to talk about. It's not been fun times in Vandy. There's a talent deficiency, and when they do bring in talent, they've gone on and left. And so maybe the scouting at Vandy, they're doing something right there. Clark Lee's doing something good there, but and all that talent, they're leaving. They're leaving for better opportunities, and it's definitely going to show, I think, with this roster. A couple things to note of during my research: they're bringing the option offense over to Vandy, and so that could be fun if you're Vandy. Seeing how the option can play out, I feel like that could be something that could get a lot of teams on their toes because the option offense is tricky to run. Now, which option offense are they going to run? Is it going to be something like we see out of Army, Navy? those types of schools, Georgia Tech back in the day, and Georgia Tech's kind of moved to a more modern style. So what kind of option offense are we going to see here? And they're going to have a couple transfer quarterbacks try to lead that offense. Also noted in my research, they're employing a new tactic, and from I got this from Athlon Sports, I believe, and I did not know this. And this is something for coaches that are interested. This is something for you, but they're employing a new tactic, which is going to be rotating tackles and guards, and by denoting strong side and weak side. They kind of already do that on the defensive side with the ends, and so they're going to employ that, and they're going to have that be a combination. So to run behind the best duo, regardless of where the ball is on the field. So I found that tactic to be pretty interesting, and I don't think used anywhere else in college football. So that's going to be something new and exciting to watch with Vandy. That's going. When can we ever say that? So I'm interested to see how that goes and what that brings for them this season. But I listen, they're at the bottom tier for a reason. So Vandy, they're here in this bottom tier. Next up, I have Arkansas in this tier. And listen, for Arkansas, it's going to be tough because Sam Pittman, while a fun coach, one thing that has been noted is, of course, his proficiency with coaching the offensive line. Getting guys there, coaching them up on the lines, and his lines, especially last year, have not been good as of late. And if that's the case with a guy that's a noted offensive line guy, I think there's some problems there. And this line, it's going to be tough too. And they got to get up to snuff. They lost a couple guys, KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders. Those guys are gone. They transferred out. And so you got new guys coming in there. Taylon Green is an interesting quarterback there. And you also have a good defensive line with Landon Jackson there. So there's that. You also have Bobby Petrino back. Oh, that's fun. You get him back coaching Arkansas as the offensive coordinator, and they got a tough schedule. I had to go and pull it up, but their schedule is not going to be fun to deal with. So if you're saying Pittman, if we're talking about Arkansas, it's going to be tough sledding for them. If you got a tough schedule, he may be on the outs, and Arkansas may be looking for a brand new coach. And yeah, just taking a look at Arkansas' schedule here, early on, they got Arkansas Pine Bluff, which I guess you can say, and that's a W. Then they got to go on the road to Oklahoma State, then UAB, at Auburn, at A&M. They got Tennessee coming home, so there could be something there. You got LSU coming there. You go to Mississippi State. You got Ole Miss, Texas, and you go on the road to Mizzou. So I mean, listen, a lot of these tougher games, they are on your home field. LSU, Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss, with the exception of Mizzou and with the exception of Oklahoma State, a lot of your tough games are in A&M. A lot of your tough games are at home. So, I mean, if you're Arkansas, maybe you can catch somebody slipping there, but the schedule is tough. And if it does not go well for Sam Pittman this year, I could see Arkansas saying, hey, we're going to make a change and we're going to move on and find our next guy. So, Arkansas, they're in this lower tier, and that's where I'm going to have them. Also in this lower tier, Mississippi State. Listen, for Jeff Lebby, the offensive style he's going to run. We've seen it at UCF, at Ole Miss, what kind of offense he runs. A lot of up-tempo stuff, really kind of quick passing game, get it to your receivers quickly, get things going up-tempo, kind of like how things have gone at Tennessee so far. So you're going to be seeing a lot of that at Mississippi State. Both Jeff Lebby and with the job there, it feels like a roster that is a year away. And with their quarterback situation, Blake Shapen is a fine quarterback at Baylor, and he's going to be coming in to run this offense. So I think Mississippi State, I feel like they're on the lower tier of these teams. It's just going to be a tough rebuilding job for Jeff Lebby in year one. Should be exciting. Should be fun to watch that offense and how quickly he can pick things up and how quickly he can move the ball and score points. I mean, that might be the only thing that's fun about it, but I think they're on the lowest tier of these SEC teams. Now to the 7-5 to 5-7 teams, spending some time talking about them. South Carolina, I feel like, is a team that fits well into this category. This is a team that has lost some talent this past year. Spencer Rattler's going to the NFL, Xavier Legette to the NFL. Juice Wells is now on a different team in the conference. So you got some receivers to replace, but you got a really fun one in Nick Carver, who's 6'5", 240, and maybe the fastest guy in the country. He could legit have just participated in the Olympics. All right. That's not even, joking right there. He legit could have gone over to Paris and have done stuff in the Olympics. That's how fast he is. So you have him at receiver and see if he can put it all together. So I guess that should be fun. Now, for the quarterback situation, it's a younger guy, Lenora Sellers, and you might be able to do some option stuff there with that run game and have some fun there and run some zone read type of stuff, use Sellers' legs and get him out in open space. But it just feels like this offense is going to be is not the strongest group of this team. It seems like it's the defense, which brings a lot of guys back, and you got some guys at linebacker that are coming back that have a lot of veteran experience. It just feels like this group, it feels like it's a 5-7 to 7-5 team. And I wonder, Beamer having success in 2022 with the end of that year, how much goodwill can that hold for him heading into 2024? And is he potentially on the hot seat? Or does South Carolina say, hey, we're going to give you one more year and see how it goes? Because I think they've trademarked Beamer Ball, so I don't know if you can fire him, after trademarking that here a few months later. So I feel like that's probably not the best move if you trademark that. So South Carolina should be interesting. Rocket Sanders coming in at running back. That's where he went in the transfer portal. So uh, I imagine you're going to be seeing a lot of Rocket and a lot of Lenoris running that ball. Rocket is one of the best running backs in the conference. So use his legs and try to see if that run game can try to help you out in these games and see what your schedule lines up. So they could be a team that could either be over 500, at 500, or below 500. And I think Kentucky can kind of be the same way. Uh, I do feel like I mentioned them earlier. They could be on the line here between this and being a spicy team because, I mean, you always take a look at Kentucky's schedule, and it feels like they always start out pretty good for the most part. It feels like that's become a hallmark with Kentucky at this point. And I feel like this year is no different because you take a look at their schedule. I think this is no, that's a basketball schedule I got pulled up, but you got Kentucky here, and you take a look at their schedule. They got Southern Miss, they got South Carolina, they got Georgia here in the first few weeks of the season, and then you got Ohio. Then you got to go on the road to Ole Miss, Vandy, Florida, Auburn. You got to go to Tennessee, Murray State, at Texas, and then Louisville. It feels like you take a look at their schedule. They can start out. They can start out 3-1 in their first four in early September. Then you got Ole Miss there. Then you got Vandy, and who knows what Florida will be, and we'll talk about them here in a bit. So it feels like Kentucky. You take a look at this schedule. Southern Miss, I think that's a win. Murray State, that's a win. Ohio, that's a win. Vandy, that's a win. And then you take a look at maybe they can beat Auburn and South Carolina. So they're right in that tier. But I think if a lot of things go their way, then they could potentially be a team that could go to 8-4. And I think a lot of it does determine what happens with their quarterback situation. Bringing in Brock Vandagriff, a high level transfer from Georgia who didn't play a lot, and see what he's got. See what he can bring to the table as a full time starter in the SEC. You also got Chip Trainum coming in from Ohio State at running back. But I think a lot of what Kentucky fans are looking at is this defense because it is absolutely big with guys up front. There's a lot of dudes up here that are just straight up big. They are not small by any means, and are going to be nightmares for teams on the interior for your centers and your guards because they got a guy, Deion Walker, who could potentially be a first round pick next year, that's 6'6", 340, and was getting into the backfield like nobody's business last year. Like, honestly, if I'm a running back and I see that coming at me, I'm making a business decision and I'm just going down. Like, I'm not taking that hit. It may not look great on tape, but I'm not trying to get hit by somebody that's 6'6" and 340 and can get in the backfield like that. So you have him coming back. You also have JJ Weaver, who can make plays on that defense. You also bring in a Georgia transfer and Jamon Dumas Johnson at linebacker. So you got a veteran linebacker in there. You also got Maxwell Hairston at corner, who had 5 picks last year. And a lot of those guys in the secondary, they're now upperclassmen. So they've seen a lot of experience, they've had a lot of experience in the SEC. So you're going to expect that to translate to more production there on that side of the football. And then a couple other pieces on offense. You got some guys coming back on the offensive line. You also got some good receivers in Dane Key and Barryon Brown that are really have a dynamic duo there. And then Jamori Macklin coming in from North Texas really kind of complements that duo right there. So a lot of it does depend on Brock Vandegrift and how he's able to perform as the full-time starter now at an SEC program, coming off of his recruiting ranking being highly thought of. So we will have to see. So let's also talk about Florida in this tier as well. And I gotta tell you what, you take a look at their schedule, man. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot. They would trade schedules with anybody else, uh, if you take a look at their schedule. I mean, because it is, oh man, it's a tough one, and and especially the last half of their season, it's going to be so tough to really do anything there. And I think with Florida, it's going to be a thing is how long does Billy Napier last? Because I'll tell you what, if he somehow finds a way to get to 7-5 with the schedule, then I think, you know what, he should come back for another year, because this schedule is just so tough. It's a make or break year for him. And you got Miami to start off everything. That is at home. And you take a look at a couple of their games, a couple of their games are at home, a couple of their tough games are at home, but some of them are on the road too. So it's about an even split. But you take a look at their first few games, you got Miami, you got Samford, you got A&M. Those are all at home. So you got that going for you. But Miami and A&M are going to be tough games. You got to go on the road to Mississippi State and UCF. One could be a big one to watch because UCF, Big 12 school now, you know, they're a Power 4 team now. I almost said Power 5, but they're a Power 4 team now playing in a big time conference, and it's an in-state rival, so they're naturally going to want to knock Florida off. And then you take a look at their schedule afterwards. You got to go on the road to Tennessee. You had that game against Georgia. You got to go to Texas. You got LSU coming there. You got Ole Miss coming to your home stadium. You got Florida State. So again, just talking about the last half of their season, you look at their November. It's Georgia, it's Texas, it's LSU, it's Ole Miss, and it's Florida State. It's so it's that those last few games are going to be so tough for Florida. Again, who would want to trade their schedule with Florida? I mean, nobody, because that schedule is oof, it is tough. So Florida, it's a make or break year for Napier. The good news is you had a lot of young talent last year that was really inexperienced. So having a year under their belts, I think, can really do them some good on both sides of the ball. On offense, Graham Mertz, who's actually a pretty steady quarterback for the most part, really efficient, only threw 3 picks, had a 73% completion percentage. Pretty solid guy. You have DJ Lagway being a backup quarterback who's a star recruit coming in. And so for him, he's not going to be relied on to really contribute early, but I do imagine they're going to have some stuff ready for him, uh, it, some packages and whatnot. But this offense, really young. You do lose ETN, but Montreal Johnson actually ran for more than ETN. So he's coming back. Eugene Wilson is going to be a guy that's going to be expected to step up with Ricky Pearsall gone. The offensive line was not great last year. It was quite possibly one of the poor units in the conference. It's offensive line. It's got to do better. And so I think if you hope for that, You hope for your young players to step up. Then maybe you can get to 7-5. And if you, again, you get to 7-5 with this schedule, bring Napier back for another year because any coach that can do good against this schedule, I mean, it deserves another year, deserves a raise because it is a tough one out there. So for Florida, you're going to need to have your young players step up. Graham Mertz be that same steady guy he was last year. And maybe you can do good against the schedule and get to a bowl game. But it's going to be tough for Florida. So, and then the last team in the 7-5 to 5-7 tier, I think, is Auburn. And a couple things to note with Auburn. The running game is strong on offense. That offense line is really better suited to run block than pass block. And they got some guys at running back that are really good. Jarquez Hunter being the key name among them, and Demarion Alston coming in behind him as well. But Hunter's the guy there. The guy's one of the best backs in the conference, and so he's coming back. It's this pass game that I think is going to determine a lot for Auburn because it was really lacking last year. And I think you trust Hugh Freeze to get that figured out at some point. And I don't know if Payne Thorne is it. I feel like maybe you should have gone and tried to get somebody better in the portal or, go out and get a freshman quarterback and try to upgrade there. But you're here with Thorne, and you hope that he's better in year two of this offense, in which the receiver position looks a lot stronger this year, and maybe that can help elevate Thorne's play in the passing game because you got Keandre Lambert from Penn State coming in, Robert Lewis from Georgia State. You got him coming in. You got a young sophomore in Caleb Burton that you have high hopes for. And then you have a guy in Cam Coleman who's a five-star receiver. He might be the number one guy, on this team. He might be wide receiver one already. Just a big-time guy coming out of high school. So the receiver position, it's definitely elevated, and I think this is going to be the thing that determines what Auburn's standing is this pass game. Can it show incremental improvement from last year to this year to get this team in a better spot? And maybe they find themselves in that third tier and get to maybe like 8, 9 wins or something like that. So I think a lot of it does determine on that pass game. They get DJ Durkin to help run that defense. He's a good coordinator. And I imagine that defense is going to be making plays all year long. But for this team to get where it wants to go, that pass game has got to get something out of it. And you got to get these receivers going and hope they can help elevate Thorne and his play. And having some big time guys out there that can go and make plays where he can throw it to them and have full confidence in them. So those are the teams in the 7-5 and 5-7 tier. Next up, we got the Spice Must Flow tier. And we're going to start off here with Texas A&M. And I think it's safe to say Mike Elko is probably a coaching upgrade over Jimbo Fisher. Because you take a look at Elko in game situations and what he's done at Duke, did a whole lot better. And I feel like, and if that's the case, then A&M, they're gonna. You look at the games that they lost. Appalachian State being one here in recent memory. They're probably going to lose fewer winnable games under Elko than they did under Jimbo. It seemed like there was a loss that had you scratching your head. It's like, well, why are they losing to that team when they have this 5-star and that 5-star and all these guys on this roster? I think Elko is an upgrade, and you see the job that he did at Duke. It was a remarkable job what he did there in Durham, North Carolina. He just knocked it out of the park there. And so, considering that, I think he should be a good fit for what they got at A&M. Now they got Notre Dame to start off week one, so it's gonna be it's gonna be a tough one, but it's at home. The crowd's gonna be amped up for it. And listen, for Notre Dame, we'll have to see how they do in big games. And coming up next, we're gonna be talking more so about those independent, those group of 5 teams. But A&M, they got a shot here to start off strong in the Mike Elko era, and they definitely can. They did lose a lot of guys in the portal. They got a lot of guys from the portal. I believe they lost like 31 guys and a lot of notable ones too, like Evan Stewart, Walter Nolan, LT Overton, just to name a couple of them. So you lose a lot of big time high recruits to the portal, and you bring some back. And I think the thing for A&M is Connor Wegman. How healthy can he be this year? Because I think if he was healthy last year, A&M would have done a little bit better. Maybe Jimbo still would have been the coach there. Although maybe it's a blessing in disguise that he was hurt, and now you got a new coach that is probably a little bit better in game management situations. So Wegman is going to have to be healthy this year for this team to get where it wants to go. It's the biggest question mark, I think, for this team. I think depth is right behind it because of the guys that you lost in the portal. That depth isn't quite where you want it to be. So that's something to watch for A&M. And some other aspects about them, you got Colin Klein, who's now the offensive coordinator, and he's got some nice weapons to play around with on that side. You got three offensive linemen returning. On the defensive side, there's some strong guys coming back, even though some of them left in the portal. You got Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart leading up front, and then you add a really impactful edge rusher and Nick Skirton from Purdue, who was an awesome pass rusher there. So you add some juice there to help out with getting to the quarterback. And the secondary added a lot of transfers too. And so A&M, it's going to be a lot of working in a lot of these transfers that you added because of the guys you lost. So I can see chemistry being a sort of thing too, and trying to get these guys to really play together, play for one another on the field with bringing in that amount of guys. But I think A&M is firmly in this kind of category right here. And then next up, we got Oklahoma. And let's talk about them because their returning production on offense, it's not great. It's 114th in the country. And I think you can point a lot of that to this offensive line because a lot of players on the offensive line left, whether portal, graduation, stuff like that. And so you had to go out and find some guys that can go and start for your offensive line. So I think that's key for Oklahoma early on is find a group of guys that you really like on the offensive line and gel together and see how that goes. Because listen, you lose that talent in the portal, you lose that amount of guys in the portal, you're going to have to figure that stuff out quickly, especially when you got a young quarterback like Jackson Arnold, who had some moments, but in that bowl game had a lot of turnovers there. That's something he's got to work on. And he's got some weapons, though, that he can toss it to if he's able to be well protected by the offensive line. He's got Gavin Sawchuk behind him as a running back. He closed out the season with 500-yard games. So he's got some momentum. And then at receiver, he's got Nick Anderson, Jalil Farouk, and then you bring in Purdue transfer Deion Burks to kind of help out there, bring in some proven production there, bring a speed element to that group. And so you're really starting to be excited about this group as an OU fan and seeing what it can bring to the table. And then on the defense, I think if you're OU, you feel a little bit better about your defense right now. And you got a couple veteran playmakers up there that you feel really good in leading and taking charge of this defense. And that's linebacker Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman. Both those guys were playmakers. Stutzman making plays in the backfield, an absolutely tackling machine. And then Bowman was a ball hawk. Had around 5, 6 interceptions last year, was up there in the national rankings. So you have him and Stutzman coming back. They're going to be the leaders of that group. They're going to get everybody in check. And so if you're OU, you feel a little bit better about your defense. And for Venables, I think he prefers that because, again, he's a defensive guy. That's his calling card. And so OU feels a little bit better, I think, about their defense. I feel like that could be what carries them. And if that offensive line starts to, gel and Arnold really starts to, show some stuff here in his young career, I think, the saying goes usually in training camp, the defense comes along faster than the offense. And I think that could be the case here. But I think if the offense comes along, then OU can be in a pretty good spot. And that's why I have them in this spicy tier right here. And they're going to start off their SEC play against UT here. And it's going to be a wild game because of the implications with Josh Heupel coming back to OU. I think it's going to be a really fun game, first game in the conference, and we'll have to see. And you got two young quarterbacks there, and that should be fun to see and diagnose what they can bring to the table. And then the last team in this tier, I have LSU, and last year they were the epitome of having the great offense, bad defense. I mean, that defense was it was just not great. It was not well ran. And of course, what can you do to try to overcome that? Hire a guy in Blake Baker, making him the highest paid assistant in the country to help run and fix this defense. And he's going to have a task on his hands this year to try to get that going. Good news is he does have Harold Perkins. The guy's pretty good. You're going to have to rotate him around. I think that's probably the move is just like move him at linebacker, move him on the edges, and just move him around different places, and opposing offenses not know where he's going to go. So LSU, you hope, I think if you want this team to be good, that defense just gets a little bit better, gets to be average, okay? It, it'd be a whole lot better sight than what they were last year. So I think if you can do that, then you're feeling good about if you're LSU. But you do have two new coordinators, including Baker. The offensive coordinator, Denbrook, is a hire from inside, so there's some familiarity there, but it's a new coordinator, and it's also a new offense with new playmakers because you're losing the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Jane Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, first round receivers, they're gone. And so you're losing a lot of production on that side, and you're going to count on guys like C.J. Daniels, Xavier Thomas, a couple transfers, Lacey, Hilton, veteran receivers in this offense to really help out. It also helps that you have a stud tight end in Mason Taylor that can be a safety blanket for quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier. And Nussmeier's a little bit different quarterback, can sling it, and is not a guy that can use his legs, not a Jane Daniels type. So it's going to be a completely different offense for LSU, but I think the offense, they should be fine. They should be good to go. I expect one of those receivers to really show out and be that number one guy in this offense. It's just that defense. Can they turn it around and get to be average nationally instead of being in that lower tier nationally? So if they can do that, then I think it could be a good year for LSU, and they could be a team that you got to watch out for them. Baton Rouge, especially if it's a night game down there. Listen, wild stuff happens, man. You don't know what's gonna go on. So LSU, I have them in that tier. Now, next up, I think what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna have my Mizzou bit with Rebecca go here to kind of kick this tier off, and me and her talk about Mizzou and what they can do this season. So, in talking about Mizzou, I have Rebecca who just came off of us talking about the Chiefs, and we're talking about Mizzou and Mizzou as far as, looking at this and this new SEC. I feel like there's one team at the top in Georgia, and then there's about a group of 6 or 7 teams afterwards, and Mizzou is right in the thick of it. And they came off with last year with such great momentum, uh, beating Ohio State, returning a lot of production, including your stars on offense. So, how are you feeling about this year of Mizzou? Coming off of last year.
Yeah, last year was kind of crazy. We've kind of just been barely keeping our head above water. And I think last year I said we were going to be at 500 or a little bit better. Well, we were quite a bit better. Um, and so in like doing my research, I read this one preview from College Football News, and I'll read the quote. It says Missouri has the perfect storm of one of its most talented slash experienced teams in years, along with a schedule that, if the team plays like it's supposed to, screams 10-2. So yeah, like they are, destined for greatness this year. There's lots of returning talent. Matt and I actually went to the Middle Tennessee State game last year, so we got a firsthand look at Luther Burden. So much fun to watch. Um, and like the whole team was just so fun, and so many of those people are coming back. Like,
Yeah.
and then you're just building on that with more great incoming talent. It's endless, like what we can do.
Yeah, you mentioned that schedule, and I took a look at it, and no Georgia, no Ole Miss, no LSU, no Tennessee. Those are, 4 of those teams are in that group right there. Easy non-conference slate. You do have road games at A&M, at Bama, at South Carolina, and Mississippi State. So besides Bama, and I feel like those games should be winnable. And then the home games, you got Auburn and Oklahoma, and who knows what Oklahoma will be coming into the conference.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a veteran team. It's a deep team, like you said, that's experience, that's got a lot of experience coming back. That's got a lot of talent. You are losing Cody Schrader, so that you're losing a awesome running back, and you're losing Javon Foster, an awesome tackle. But that's what the transfer portal is for. You bring in some guys that you feel
Mm-hmm.
confident in to come in and try to maybe not replace them, but try to help fill in those gaps of the team in which you feel like, okay, we need some help here. Let's go address them. And I feel like they did that. They brought in a couple running backs through the portal, a couple offensive linemen. And I feel like with this team that got set up, especially on offense, with Brady Cook, Theo East, Luther Burden, who's the best receiver in the conference and one of the best in the country, you got to feel pretty good about your offense heading into 2024. It's just getting a balance on offense and getting your offensive line set and ready to go. If you got that, you know what you got at quarterback, you know what you got at receiver. You should feel nothing but confident heading into this year.
Yeah, and I pulled a couple stats from the Middle Tennessee State game because I was talking about it with Matt, and we were like, it was a very rush heavy game. It was one of the earlier ones in the season, so it was out of conference. But I was like, it was a very rush heavy game. Like I remember it was a big deal when like there was like a throw. I mean, usually it was to Luther, but we were like, it just seemed like it was like a big deal. They rushed 46 times and then they only had 19 passing attempts, but 14 of those were completed. So it was 14 for 19. And on average, it was 14.6 yards of completion. So there was
Big time.
obviously some strategy there, big time strategy. And I know, I mean, it was Middle Tennessee State. So, I mean, that defensive line was not ready. They were not
No.
ready. But, I mean, they really seemed like they knew what they were doing. They were really confident. Um, I do think the rushing game, I think, was a little bit lacking, even though like they were really using it a lot. Might have just been Middle Tennessee State's defense, but I think maybe like losing some of those running backs, gaining some other ones. We'll see. Maybe the offensive part now will be a little bit more balanced instead of mainly being like not receiver heavy, but like where that's where more of the talent's at. And when you have someone like Luther Burden, of course, that's going to be where the talent is anyway. It's never going to be perfectly balanced. But if you want to, especially with it, I don't know anything else about any of the other SEC teams. I don't really care. Um, but if you're playing someone is with the kind of schedule you have, and you're playing someone like Texas A&M, which probably is going to be one of your toughest opponents, and Alabama, where they're very balanced overall, you want to have a balanced off. You want to have a balanced enough offense to really throw their defense off, so they don't know what you're going to throw at them. Or, haha, that was kind of a pun. Didn't realize that, but yeah, I think that was my thought. I think that was it.
Yeah. And listen, I also don't know. Yeah, I haven't done any research, but I don't have a clue what Bama's going to be this year because, you know, post Saban era, I have no idea what to expect. With Saban, I felt like, okay, I can kind of get an idea of what to expect here. I have no idea of what to expect. If it's a home game or away game, I have no idea what to expect from Bama. So I'm just going to throw my arms up and say, who knows? Maybe you guys can get that one against Bama. I mean, I will gladly take you guys beating Bama. I'll cheer for you, because, I hate Bama. And I'm going to be stressing about Bama during y'all's wedding since that's the third Saturday in October. So, yeah. The defense, there's a couple losses there. You're losing a good defensive coordinator in Blake Baker off to LSU, and you got a new defensive coordinator, and you lost some guys to the draft. namely Darius Robinson up front, who's now playing for the Cardinals, Tyron Hopper, Chris Abrams-Drain, Rake Straw on the back end. So you're losing a couple key and contributors up front and on the back end. So you're going to have some guys step up on both the front seven and in that secondary to really help out. And of course, they hit the portal hard for those positions too. But guys like Johnny Walker, Christian Williams up front are going to have to be big time pass rushers. And you also have a star freshman in Williams Naweri, who's a 5-star guy playing on that defensive line. And hey, listen, you see Darius Robinson go pro, first round pick, you're probably excited and like, okay, I can do that. So the defense, I'm curious to see how it goes with a it allowed 14 or less points in 4 of the last 6 games that they had last year. So that's something to build upon, but I wonder what they're going to be like losing those guys, bringing in all those transfers, and having a new defensive coordinator. Are they going to be as good on that side of the ball? The offense is no question, but I think the defense is going to be a question, and I think depth-wise as well. I think that's also something to consider.
I think that's going to be the big thing to watch. Yeah. Will they be able to, I guess I'm trying to think of the phrasing, like, will they be able to make up for what was lost and continue on the success from last season instead of basically going back to the drawing board and having to restart?
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, listen, and as far as returning production, second in the conference, 17th nationally. So listen, if you're Mizzou, you should feel pretty good about this. And in this new SEC with no divisions, everything's fair game. You know, you can finish number 2 in the conference and not have to worry about divisional stuff anymore. You might have to worry about some tiebreaker stuff, which apparently, from what I've read, it all sounds convoluted, as tiebreakers are. But if you're Mizzou, you feel good about your schedule. You have some teams that you're not going to face, but you look at the games that you have, and they're like, okay, we got a star receiver. People are going to have to guard him. We got a veteran quarterback. That goes a long way in the SEC, especially one that's proven production. So I think if you're Mizzou, you should feel pretty excited about this upcoming season. It should be a fun year.
Yeah, fun year. Wouldn't be stressing or I mean, I wouldn't be complaining too much. Yeah. It'll be a good season to watch. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, it's going to be so much fun. Again, I'm rooting for you guys to take down Bama. Okay, so now that we're back talking from Mizzou, that's one team down. There's 5 other teams that I think are teams to watch out for that could be Georgia's title opponents in the SEC Conference Championship game. So let's talk about the other 4 of them. And, let's go and talk about, let's just go ahead and knock out Tennessee. Let's just go ahead and do it. Now, it's rare, I think, that my biased view and my unbiased view rarely come together. I think this year it does. And I think it's this. If Nico is what everybody says he's supposed to be, he's had comps to Justin Herbert. He's been talked about being a taller Bryce Young. And if he's able to be that guy, and if the defense, after being talked up this all season with having a lot of dudes up front, having a lot of depth, in which that offensive style that they play, you need those guys. You need guys to be able to rotate in, high level guys. If they got that depth up front on defense, I think if they got those 2 things, this team, I think the ceiling is 10-2. I think it is, and I can go and pull up the schedule, but they do have a couple tough games early on. If that could really deter them. But I think if those 2 things, if they got those 2 things going for them, then I think it is going to be another good season for the Vols. And, last year, it was a different season. With Joe Milton, I felt like, as much as I love Joe, I felt like you kind of had to manage him a little bit. And I don't know if there's anything going on with as far as chemistry with the receivers, or the receivers just had a drop problem last year. But I think Nico, after seeing what he did in the bowl game, even though it's a small sample size, there's still a lot to improve there, but there's a lot to really like at what he did in that game against Iowa, against a defense that's super tough. And mind you, that team scored more on Iowa's defense than the reigning champs did in the Big Ten title game. Now, granted, one of those was a pick six by the star defensive end, James Pierce, but again, scored more points than Michigan did on them. And so, I mean, listen, if you take a look at the schedule, Chattanooga, that's a win. NC State, I think, is going to be a tough test. We talked about them. I think they can get the win there. Kent State. And then Oklahoma is going to be, I think, the big pendulum matchup. And it's going to really determine where they can go from there. If they win that game, they start out 4-0, huge win on the road at Oklahoma, and then they have a week off, go to Arkansas. Then they got two big games against Florida and Alabama. I do think Georgia will probably end up being one of the losses, and I could see one of these other games. Maybe it's NC State or Oklahoma, or maybe Arkansas finds a you know. I still have feelings about Tennessee in these situations. Like, listen, even if Tennessee could go undefeated, and I would still have these feelings. So it can happen, even though they're in the bottom tier. But maybe Oklahoma, maybe NC State or Florida or Bama. Maybe those are your two losses this year. But listen, I think the ceiling here is 10-2 with this team, and I really love what they got coming back. Talked about that defense, and you got Pierce coming back, and that group of guys up front. I feel like they can rotate in guys. It feels like UT has not had a team like that in forever on that side of the ball. And when they can just rotate dudes in every possession. And when you got a guy like James Pierce there too, you feel better about that because that guy was coming off the edge and acted like a maniac last year and getting after the quarterback. 10 sacks. And this defensive line too. Honestly, looking at their stats, they were second in sacks. They led the conference in tackles for loss. And a lot of those guys are coming back. Amari Thomas, Bryson Eason. You're still figuring out a guy on the opposite side of James Pierce. You got a veteran linebacker in Pele coming back from injury. The question is that secondary because they lost a lot of guys via transfer. You got some guys coming in, and Jacoby Thomas, McCoy from Oregon State, presumably going to be taking in a starting role. Now they did lose Jordan Thomas here for the season recently, so you got to figure out there. But they got a freshman they're really excited about, Boo Carter, that can play anywhere in that secondary that they're excited about. And then this offense, I'm really excited about too. The receivers got to play better this year. They got to catch the ball, but I'm excited about the room. Squirrel White and Brew coming back. Excited for him. Thornton, excited for him because it felt like he was finding his stride before he got hurt. Then you bring in Chris Brazell from Tulane, and then Mike Matthews is a five-star receiver. A lot of people are excited about. Did really well in the spring game, and it's going to be hard to keep him off the field. And then the running game, you got Dylan Sampson leading the way with the running game. Losing Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, it's going to be tough. But the offensive line, I really enjoy too. And I think honestly, if you're going to win the SEC, you need a really good quarterback and you need really strong offensive line, defensive line play. And I think this team has it. Now, depth on the offensive line is still questionable. Hopefully, some guys get better during, training camp and get better during practice. But I love this offensive line. You got three seniors at center, right guard, right tackle, and K. Mays, Spraggins, and John Campbell. You have a star transfer coming in and Lance Hurd coming in from LSU. So he has that on lock. So if you feel confident about this UT's offensive line. So again, I feel the ceiling is 10-2, and maybe that can get them into a conference title game. But again, it's all going to depend on if Nico, if he is what everybody thinks he is, if he's what all the UT fans think he is, and can this defense, can they step up? Can the secondary get a little bit better? And can they actually be able to rotate guys in and out and not see a drop off and play? If that happens, then it's going to be a special year, and I'm going to be one happy guy if that happens. So again, it's rare that the bias and the unbiased kind of come together there. But in all honesty, just kind of thinking about it, My biased opinion, I think Nico is who he thinks he is, but we had to see. We had to watch these games and see if he can translate what he's done in training camp and practice over to actual gameplay and see if he learned anything from that Iowa game. So moving on from that UT, let's talk about the other UT. Let's talk about Texas here real quick and talk about them. I think they're probably running second in this conference, if we're being honest, just as of right now. Now, did they lose some NFL talent? Yes, they lost a lot of NFL talent. Jonathan Brooks, A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy on the offensive side. And then on the defensive side, Jalen Ford, you lose Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy in the middle of that defense. You lose some guys there, but you have a lot of really good talent coming back. And you start out with Quinn Ewers, who did better last year, but still got to improve some stuff this year, improve his stock for the draft. And then, of course, you're always going to have those guys, whispering, Arch Manning, probably the most heralded backup quarterback we got in this country right now. So, if there's one slight sign of trouble for Ewers, or if he gets hurt, even, Arch is going to get the reins, and we're going to have to see how he does. But you take a look at this group that Texas is bringing in 2024. You could not be in a better spot if you're Texas heading into the SEC than you are right now. And you take a look at this group, you got CJ Baxter, who's out for the year, so that's a loss. Jaden Blue, Jarrett Gibson are going to be guys expected to step up now in that running game and helping out there. But you have guys at receiver and Isaiah Bond, who you got from Bama, Silas Golden from Oregon State, Golden, who's coming in as a transfer as well. So you got those guys coming in. You got a couple of young blue chip guys in Jonte Cook and freshman Ryan Wingo coming in. So there's a lot of talent there. And you also lose Jatavian Sanders at the tight end position. Another Bama transfer, Namari Niblack, comes in to kind of help out there. But up front, they're about as strong of an offensive line as you can think of. LSU, I think, didn't mention that, but LSU, they got a strong offensive line. LSU might have the best offensive line in the conference. And Texas, I don't think, is far behind them because they're led by a future first rounder in Kelvin Banks at left tackle. So they're really strong up front. The defense, though, how are you going to replace those guys in Sweat and Murphy up front? That's going to be the big thing. You got Vernon Broughton and you got Alfred Collins up front that are veterans, but can they help out with that production up front? Because Sweat was a big dude and just eats up space and was an Outland Award winner. And then Murphy was an incredible pass rusher in that middle of the defense. So you got some guys to replace up front, but you might have some guys on the edges that can get after it, and Ethan Burke, Trey Moore, who transferred in from UTSA, had 14 sacks. So I'll have to see how he acclimates to SEC play. Well, you got those guys coming in with bigger roles. Anthony Hill, who was a freshman last year, really did well. He's going to take on a bigger role, be that inside linebacker after Ford left, and really take that role and try to see if he can really excel at that and take a jump in year two and really be a star of this defense. But the questions are going to come in the secondary too. And you got a lot of question marks there. Malik Muhammad was a good freshman last year. He's going to be a guy that's going to be up there with their top corner. You also have guys in Jadavian Cole up there coming in. And you have Andrew Makuba coming in from Clemson at safety, bringing in some veteran experience back there, really talented veteran experience. So that's secondary, and the interior of the defensive line are going to be the two question marks for Texas. But other than that, I feel like that's a pretty strong defense. But again, I think Texas, you could not be in a better spot coming into this conference than you are right now with this group. And you got to feel really confident if you're Texas that, hey, we have a shot here of making the conference title game here in year one. And so if you're Texas, you feel good about that. Now, that week two matchup against Michigan, that one's going to be a great one. I don't know who to pick in that one. I might lean Texas. I think I might have even said so on our Big Ten pod, but that's going to be a high level matchup. That's going to be big time in this early part of the season in week two. It's going to be a fun one. So we'll have to see what happens with Texas in that one. So Texas there, I think they're running second in this conference. Now, Next up, Ole Miss. Ole Miss, really good team last year. It's just that whenever they face good teams, they did squat. Whenever they played Georgia or Alabama, they couldn't do anything. And so I think the thing for them this year is to be better in those games and maybe even catch one. Because you take a look at Ole Miss's team this year, it might be just as good or maybe even better. Now, they did lose Quinshon Judkins to the portal, so you got some guys in Ulysses Bentley, Parrish coming in as a transfer to help out with that running game. But you take a look at that offense, it should be really fun to watch. You got Jackson Dart, one of the most experienced quarterbacks coming back in this conference. And can he take a step up as a veteran in this conference? And can he elevate his play, in which maybe that can elevate Ole Miss to being in the conference title game by December? And you take a look at this offense and the weapons he has, you're really excited about the guys he has because he has Trey Harris coming back, who did really well coming in as a transfer, had nearly 1,000 yards receiving, and was just an explosive playmaker, worked well in the intermediate part of the field. And you have Juice Wells coming in from South Carolina. He's going to be a big addition on this team as well. So you got those two level guys. You're excited about that. Michael Trigg and Priest Corn at tight end. You're excited about those two. And then the offensive line, you're hoping takes a step up and play. And what helps is you're bringing two guys that played on the best offensive line in the country last year out in Washington. And I have to go look up their names right here. Nate Calippo and Julius Bulow coming in, filling in both those guard positions. You got to feel really good about those guys coming in from the best offensive line in the country, filling in those gaps. And so you're really excited for Ole Miss about this high level offense that can put up a lot of points. And I'll have to pull up Ole Miss's schedule too because I want to see what their schedule's like. But that offense is really fun. It's going to be fun to watch with those guys making plays. And Kiffin is going to scheme them really well. It's going to scheme them wide open. So taking a look at Ole Miss and their schedule, honestly, you take a look at it. You got Furman in week 1, and then you got I have to pull the rest of the schedule up. Middle Tennessee State. Then you I have to go back here. I'm fooling around with the schedule too much. Then you got Wake Forest. You go on the road there. Georgia Southern. You got Kentucky, South Carolina. You go on the road to LSU. You got Oklahoma at home. You got Georgia at home. And so, hey, listen, you got one of your toughest matchups. You got that at home. You got that at home, and that's a big time opportunity down the line. That LSU game ought to be crazy, especially if that's night. We just talked about that. Oklahoma, that should be a fun game in October. The defense has got to see an improved play. And speaking of Florida, Princely Umanamilan, and I just butchered that name to the high heavens. Uh, Coming in as an edge rusher, Florida's probably only productive edge rusher coming in. You bring in Walter Nolan, and you bring in Trey Amos, Chris Paul, all these guys from the SEC, high level transfers. That should really boost this defense up to an incredibly high level. And so you take a look at them, you have them coming in along with Jared Ivey, with JJ Pegues, and you have John Saunders coming in on that back end. You feel excited about this Ole Miss defense and the talent they bring in. And you take a look at that schedule and this team, you should feel really confident in this team if you're Ole Miss. That offense is going to be legit. And I think if those transfers really help improve this defense, that can go a long way in getting Ole Miss to Atlanta in December. So next one up with Ole Miss down and out the way, we're going to go and talk about Alabama and talk about them because Alabama, I'm curious to see what they're going to look like in the Kalen DeBoer era. Now, DeBoer's a winner, but I think we should expect a little bit of a drop off, because I mean, you're replacing the greatest coach of all time. You know, are you going to have those same exact results? No. But the fact of the matter is, Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's gone. I think that'll be the same case here because this team still has a lot of talent. You know, they still got 4 and 5 star guys littered everywhere, you know. But you take a look at this team, Jalen Milroe, I'm really intrigued what the offense looks like with DeBoer and Milroe in this partnership and what Nick Sheridan's going to get out of him as an offensive coordinator. Where are they going to go with? Because he's a different guy than Michael Penix was. Milroe, not as accurate, but he can use his legs, unlike Penix. And I think if you're DeBoer, I think you can use that to your advantage and really scheme around your players. And, try not to put a square peg in a circle hole. The saying goes. I may have flipped it there, but I think you really adjust it to Milroe's strengths in throwing that deep ball and being able to make plays, use his legs, and really exploit teams and trying to get out of tricky situations. So I think DeBoer and Sheridan, they would be smart, I think, to really kind of build that offense around his strengths and use that to run this offense rather than trying to make him what Michael Penix was last year. Now, if he's worked on his accuracy, then great. Maybe he can do some of that stuff, but he's a different quarterback, and I think use his strengths. And I think if you're Alabama, you feel pretty good about that. Now, the running game, there's a lot of losses there because your top two guys are gone and you got some young guys stepping up. Jam Miller's the only guy that returns that's had some experience. So you got a couple young guys and Justin Haynes and Richard Young that are going to have to step up in this running game and really contribute and see if they can be those next great Alabama backs. And we'll have to see how they perform in this system, but they're going to have to step up regardless. Now at receiver, I want to see what they look like here because like you probably wondered, how has Bama been a receiver? It feels like, honestly, since Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, they haven't had a top level guy like that. And that's been a few years ago. And those guys are now going to get their second contracts. So who's going to step up? Kobe Prentice is the only guy that had 15 or more catches, and he's coming back. I believe Kendrick Law is coming back as well. And you got Jeremy Bernard, who's coming in from Washington. Now, didn't really play that much. Now, when McMillan was hurt, he really did. But Polk and Odunze received more of the target. So you bring Bernard in, and in this receiver group, you're going to have to hope for somebody to really step out among the rest, whether it's one of those guys or maybe it's Ryan Williams, a star freshman, that he can step up and cement himself in this conference. So you're going to have these young guys in this receiver and running back group that you're going to have to count on in this Bama offense. Now, the offensive line, it should be good. You are losing J.C. Latham, but Caden Proctor, who transferred out of Bama, went to Iowa, and is now back at Bama, is back at left tackle. And you got Tyler Booker, who's an all SEC guard, and you got Parker Brailsford from Washington, that's also was a part of that star offensive line last year. So you should feel good about that. It's just finding out if you can find a guy that can replace Latham and replace his power that he brought on that offensive line. So I think for Bama, it's just really the question there is Jalen Milroe. How's he going to be with this offense? How's the board going to utilize him and his skill set? And I think, again, he just needs to utilize what Milroe brings to the table rather than just try to make him something he's not. So I'm curious to see what Bama has on the offensive side. On the defensive side, you're replacing a lot of guys. Terrion Arnold, McKinstry, they're gone on the back end. Dallas Turner and Chris Brassford, they're going on the edges. So guys are going to have to step up on both those positions. Now, in the secondary, you look at that group, Malachi Moore is the only really notable guy that's coming back as senior defensive back. So it helps you have a leader back there. And you're going to have transfers and freshmen to rely on if you're Bama. It's either Damani Jackson from USC, Deshaun Jones, or it's a freshman in Zane Mincy, Jalen McCobway, Xavier Brown. You're going to rely on them. And I think they're going to be relied on pretty early on to kind of help contribute on that back end of that defense. And one of those guys is not ready to go. So the back end should be interesting to see how all that plays out. And on the edge rushers, who's going to replace those guys up front? Dallas Turner, first round pick, Braswell, high level pick as well. So you have Jihad Ward, Quindarius Robinson. You're going to be looking to them to get more snaps and more production out of them on the edges. Deontay Lawson, one of the best linebackers, inside linebackers in the country. So you know what you're going to get out of him. And you take a look at up front, they got a lot of dudes up front too that are really big time, that are huge, and they're going to be hard to stop. Jaheim Otis, Keenan, and Tim Keenan, Tim Smith, and you bring in LT Overton from A&M to help out. So for Bama, I feel like there's a lot more proven talent on this side, but you are replacing a lot more high level talent on this side. But there's a couple more proven guys than there are on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm curious to see what Bama is going to be this year. And then finally, the team I think is the team to beat in this conference. It's the Georgia Bulldogs. And I don't think it's kind of sort of close, but at the same time, Georgia, you take a look at them, and honestly, they are the best team in the country, but they're kind of like Michigan that, you know, they're boring. They're boring to watch. You know what they're going to do. They're going to be dominant, and that they're going to win most, if not every single one of their games. Now, their schedule this year, we talked about up top, is a whole lot different compared to what their schedule was a year ago. And I'm going to pull this up because, again, they start out with Clemson in week one, and that's going to be a big time matchup later this month, actually, August 31st. So I'm really excited about that one. They go on the road to Kentucky, go on the road to Alabama, and that's pretty much their September. That's pretty much their first 4 weeks. They play Tennessee Tech in between in Clemson and Kentucky and Bama, but three of your first 4 games are against teams that you're going to have to be slightly concerned about. And then you got Auburn at home, you got Mississippi State. You go on the road to Texas, you got Florida, you got Ole Miss, Tennessee, and you take a look at it, a lot of their tough games, they're either a neutral site like Clemson, or they're on the road in Bama, in Texas, in Ole Miss. Now, that's not to say they won't take care of them, but that's still a tough schedule to really overcome. And so, and listen, you can't talk about Georgia's schedule this year. I mean, they got a legit tough schedule to watch out for this upcoming season. And so, talking about them, Carson Beck is a guy that's up there as far as Heisman talk, and is a guy last year that a lot of people had questions about, and we talked about them, but played a cool, calm, and collected style of football and really held his own and played well in big time moments and big time games and did really well for himself and what people think of him. And so that's why he's up for a lot of people think could be up for the Heisman. So you have him coming back and top quarterback in the conference. Now you are going to replace a guy like Brock Bowers. That's going to be tough. But Oscar Dell did pretty well when Bowers was hurt. So you have him coming back and you're excited about him. You're also going to replace Lad McConkey and what he brought to this offense. And those two guys were kind of safety blankets. So I think if there's one thing I have with Georgia is who's replacing that production and who's Beckett going to be looking to on critical downs and critical moments. You know, is it going to be somebody like Dylan Bell or Dominic Lovett or Vandy transfer London Humphreys? Delp is going to play a factor in that role as well. So who's he going to be looking to in those big time moments? Maybe it's Colby Young, another transfer. So they really went on the portal and got a lot of transfers at receiver to kind of help out there. Humphreys was a good receiver at Vandy as a freshman. So they get some young talent there in that receiver room. The running game is going to take another level up with Trevor Etienne coming in there. He's going to be a really big time running back in this group. And you got Branson Robinson and Roderick Robertson, two big backs that really kind of fit the mold of the Georgia running backs that are going to be running behind this offensive line. Who, listen, you do lose Amarius Mims, but big time guys are coming back, and Tate Ratledge, Dylan Fairchild, two of the best guards in the conference. Ratledge may be one of the best guards in the country. And then you got Ernest Green at left tackle. And those guys are all high level talent guys on the offensive line. So for Georgia, it's just business as usual, I think, for offense. But I think the key is finding the guys that can replace the production for Brock Bowers and McConkey in that offense. Now, on defense, you do lose some guys in the secondary, but they got a lot of talented guys coming in from this freshman class. You do lose Kamari Lasser, Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard, all high level picks last year, but you got several back on that on the back end. But a lot of it is young talent. You got Dalen Everett, who is not as proven, but he's going to be taking a starting role there at corner. You also got some sophomores in Julian Humphreys. You got Daniel Harris coming in as well, but you got some freshmen coming in with this secondary. You got Malachi Starks to be the star of that back end of the defense, but you got Ellis Robinson and KJ Bolden. They're going to be in the mix as freshmen, high level freshmen. They are going to see the field pretty early. They're too talented to be kept off it. So it's going to be a young secondary. I think if anything about the defense, that's where the questions are. Everywhere else, I feel like you feel pretty good about it. Michael Walker is the star of this defense, and he's going to be playing in a more different role this year. It's going to be more so standing up, instead of having his hand in the dirt. And so you're going to see him do some more stuff out there on the edges. You got some good defensive tackles, veteran defensive tackles, and Tyrion Ingram Dawkins and Warren Brinson is your stack house. You got those guys coming in. So listen, you feel good about that front seven. Linebackers, no shortage of talent there. Jalen Walker, Small Munden. You got CJ Allen, who was one of the top freshmen in the conference last year, was a tackling machine for this Georgia defense. So, listen, there is no shortage of talent on this Georgia defense, on this Georgia team, but there are some questions. And on the defense, though, in particular, it's that secondary and that young talent. And can they get things right there? And maybe those freshmen step up. I mean, Malachi Starks was in that position. He stepped up as a freshman, and you see what he's done in his career. And maybe that can be the case for Robinson or Bolden on the back end of this defense. But again, this Georgia team, it's just loaded, top to bottom. And there's a reason why they're in this top tier as being a title contender. I think them in Ohio State are probably the two top teams in the country, and without a doubt. And I think, the AP poll just came out as of today, and I had to go and take a look at it. But, they're up there for me as being the top two teams that we have talked about so far in these previews. And I think by far and away, they're going to be the two teams that are on title watch for this year, heading into 2024. So let me go and pull up the AP poll here, and let's dissect it a little bit and talk about some of these teams that are in the SEC. So we got Georgia at 1 and Ohio State at 2, Oregon 3. We got Texas and Alabama running 4 and 5. Then you got Ole Miss at 6. You got Mizzou at 11, Tennessee at 15, LSU at 13. Then you got Oklahoma at 16, A&M 20, and that is it. So you take a look at the preseason poll. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams ranked in the top 20 alone in this preseason poll. So that just goes to show you how deep this conference is this upcoming season. Everybody, that'll do it for this edition of our previews for college football. That's all the power conferences. Next week, we're going to be moving on to the group of fives, to the independents, to the Notre Dames of the world. So that will be it. And then we will be heading to our previews and talking about our predictions and talking about everything that we've talked about here in these previews, wrapping it all up, making some predictions, who's going to win these conferences. I've already kind of, stepped on some toes on who I think is going to win some of these conferences. So either way, we're going to do that. It's going to be a fun show, and that'll be here in a couple weeks. And then later on this week, we'll dive into the AFC South and talk about those teams. So you don't want to miss that. Again, thank you everybody so much for tuning in, whether it's on our podcast platforms. Again, check us out where you guys get your podcasts, or whether it's on YouTube. Thank you guys so much for checking this show out. So everybody, that'll do it for me. Thank you all so much for joining in on this edition of College Football Previews, and have a good rest of your day. And we will talk to you all next time.